Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And you're in for an Uber treat today because I back Jim Massey, and we're going to honor Jim's latest book release, Risk in Action: A Leader's Guide to Clarity. Jim, first of all, welcome back to the podcast.
Tom, wonderful to be back. I appreciate the invitation.
I'm just going to go right into it because I found that this book really built on some of the themes you laid out in Trust in Action. And I wanted to maybe ask that as a starting point. Was that something you intend? Did you do that? It was you intended to do it, or how would you characterize this book as a standalone from Trust in Action?
Yeah, risk came and found me. When we talked last, I wrote Trust in Action because I realized people were using a word, but we weren't sharing a definition. And more importantly, leaders did not have something that was helping them to take action. And fast forward to where we are, I was in boardrooms, I was in executive sessions, I was coming in as a keynote for companies, and I started to realize people weren't just struggling with trust, they were also struggling with risk. And that's when I started to realize that I needed to introduce something a little bit more. And I had taken for granted as a practitioner what I had available to myself. And Tom, I always say this, that I'm a five and dime practitioner. I'm not hoity-toity. I don't use a lot of big words. I make things simple. And as a behaviorist, I try to help give tools for people. When you're in this stressful situation, what can you do to take action to move forward? And that's when I started to realize, yeah, trust is one aspect, but so is risk. And more importantly, so is fear. So we're going to dive into a little bit more about this because I initially had thought I was going to write a third book about fear in action. And when I was doing this, my publishing coach was like, Jim, no, you need to bring it all together and put it together in one book. And so that's why Risk in Action is a little bit more comprehensive, I think.
So I think I'm a lawyer by professional training, and lawyers are one of the most conservative professions there are. But most of my professional career involved working for or with energy companies, which are typically not risk averse, I would say. And when I went in house, I had a op guy sit me down and say, Tom, if I don't go to a rig, I don't have any risk, but we don't make any money.
Yes.
So you got to get me to that rig safely so I can make money. And that simple conversation always stuck with me. And it struck me and then it stuck with me. And what I found in business was the higher the risk, the potential greater return or reward. Now, that didn't mean being unsafe. That didn't mean you couldn't have a risk management strategy. But if you had a high risk and you manage that risk and a high risk with a high risk management strategy, you could potentially make a lot of money. So if you're going to build a gas processing plant on the African coast, right on the coast, you better build it up 10 or 20 feet because there's going to be a storm at some point. Things like that. Risk is something that the energy space is comfortable with assessing. And I, as a lawyer working for an energy services company, part of my role was to help manage that risk. So I became comfortable in that role. And I guess the thing that struck me first about your book was, do business people understand that with risk properly managed, the reward can be higher than not? And let's figure out a way to manage that risk. Or is there such an endemic fear of risk that people are only going to do what's right in the middle of the road, which is not a wrong strategy? It's just a strategy that brings less return. Or am I completely being an energy Texan guy off base?
I will tell you. So if you're listening to this, Tom basically summed up the whole concept of my book. And just the other day, Tom, I was working with a potential client. And the question she asked me was, so people think about risk, but they never think about the opportunity. And I said, I love where you're going. And I said, but as a behaviorist, I'm trying to even simplify this. What if risk wasn't a choice, but a polarity, something we had to manage, not just choose risk or don't choose risk? And what if risk was being left behind or innovating beyond one's comprehension? And Tom, to me, that's what you just were talking about. So we have been taught that risk is the decision: engage it and get harmed, or stay away from it and stay safe. And I'm coming out with no, risk is simply the gap between where we are and where we want to go. And as leaders, do we have the clarity to take the first step to start going to land of next? It's that simple. I do, and I will say this because you brought it up first. I do think attorneys have ill-defined risks to protect their ability to mitigate to zero. Don't do it. Stay away. We're safe if we tell you not to stay. But if you think about it, I think of companies like 3M, right? The Post-it was an accident, right? And to me, instead of calling it an accident, looking back, people call it innovation. What if we forward looked, started saying, what can we learn from something that we believe is a mistake today, but may actually be the innovation that saves us for tomorrow? And that's a fundamental shift. And I do believe it is rooted heavily in fear, which is why I had to bring my fear model forward a little bit.
Another thing that happened early in my anti-corruption career was a CEO told me I want to do X. And I said to him, you might as well get fitted for an orange jumpsuit now. And he looked at me and he said, no, wait a minute. You're the lawyer. You go figure out a way for me to do this legally, ethically, and in compliance with every rule I need to comply with. And I thought about it a minute. I said, he has absolutely defined my job. The business is here to do business, and my job as a lawyer is to facilitate that and make sure it's all done legally and ethically. And I didn't think of it at the time, but as innovation, but that you hit the nail right on the head. That he was requiring me to be innovative from the legal side of things. And so why can't we have that discussion, or is this book going to hopefully help lead that discussion about being more innovative in this area?
That's what my goal is. If we can start to redefine risk, not as something that is this choice of harm or go for it, to how best can we face everything coming at us, prioritize it, frame why it matters, and then make the choice to move forward. The thing, Tom, that I think you and I have always appreciated about one another, but I've come to learn, I'm not an expert on trust or risk or fear. I am an expert on action, moving forward, even when, I'll give you this analogy. I've already said risk is the simple gap between where we are and where we need to go. I believe trust is the bridge that will take us there. But fear is the fog that keeps us oscillating in the land of now, never moving to land of next where we need to go. And so I firmly and adamantly believe that this book can be the catalyst for these conversations so that people can realize there is a bridge there. Just kind of poke your toe and find your footing. And sometimes that first step may be 2 inches, just so that you know that you've done something that day. But what we're not going to do is put risk into frameworks instead of courageous actions that lead us somewhere forward. And that to me is the difference.
Certainly since the pandemic, and definitely in the year 2025, we have seen as much change for business as perhaps any other year. And part of that's due to a new political administration. Part of that is due to a world economy that is changing dynamically. And what I've tried to emphasize to compliance professionals is compliance needs to be ready to advise the business on risk and have a process in place that you can put a new risk and plug it in and help the business understand what that risk and have a risk management strategy. Is that a conversation you find business leaders are either having or at least open to having?
I want to clarify one point. When you talk about business leaders, are you including us as compliance professionals in that?
I meant the operational business leaders.
Yep. Operational business leaders are talking about that. However, this is similar. You and I talked about this before. I don't know if you remember, but when I was at AstraZeneca, I was asked to overhaul the global compliance program and bring these practices into place, right? So this book is not me sitting in theory. It's me going into a multinational organization and overhauling what compliance would do or could do, starting with culture and policy. And one of the first actions is I took a code of conduct from 30 pages down to 1, and it was 12-point font with 5 values and 2 behaviors each, 10 total behaviors of what we expected every employee to use when they made decisions. We started to operationalize what integrity looked like, to drive innovation. And for me, what this boils down to, and the reason I had to ask this is at that time, I realized the business was ready for it. But you know who wasn't? The compliance professionals who had been trained to operate differently. Our job was to almost put the no into innovation and say, no, we can't do that. And so as we launched this, a year later, I started to realize the transformation I needed to do was not in the business, because I believe operational leaders see the day-to-day pressures that are coming at them, and they're having these innovative, clarifying conversations of what steps need to have. But the compliance professionals are almost paralyzed out of fear of, what if I give the wrong advice on this? What will that do to the company? What will that do to me personally? And so just like trust, risk sits both at the enterprise level, but as importantly at the self level. Because what I keep talking about in leadership is if I cannot transform myself, I cannot transform my teams, and I sure as heck cannot transform the enterprise. So we as compliance professionals have to transform ourselves on how we think about risk so that we can be more present and enabling those business conversations to go forward. And the final thing I'm going to say about this, the thing that just gets my passion going for this is when I wrote Trust in Action, my model is can, care, do. There are three elements of trust. Under can, I talk about values, the value of values, and they must be legitimate and genuine. And one of the challenges we find is that of the Fortune 1000, there are 5 common values. 2 of those are innovation and integrity. And those are 2 of the most competing values. And I'm saying they don't have to compete anymore. If we do things the right way, the innovation we bring is going to work. And so the whole book is teaching people that risk is not a stop sign. Risk is actually the invitation to innovation, and we always have the choice to do it the right way. So I'm actually trying to get business operational leaders and compliance professionals to align that risk is the way forward. It's never been what got in our way. We allowed it to.
How can a compliance professional think through the management of risk in a way that would allow them to accept that risk is there, yet put forward either a process or a system that could help them move away from this fear-based mentality, if I can use that phrase?
Yeah, yeah. No, so now I want to move into my fear model. And actually, in the book on page 101 is one of the most transformational pieces. And Tom, what I was excited about as authors, we often talk that what we write about is actually the most transformational for ourselves. And as I was writing Risk in Action, what I realized is, again, I love trust, I love risk, I love fear, but I'm about action. I want people to do something. And so that's why I created the action universe, which is where action is the kind of the sun of my system, and the 3 planets that rotate around it competing for that energy are risk, trust, and fear. And so I think one of the biggest things we need to do as compliance professionals is move out of the fear. And the best way we can do that is some work that I really respect is by Eamon Wolf out of Australia. And he talks about what fear is, and he's mapped fear to the 9 stages of human development. There's a lot of work there. But if I boil it down, what I learned through working with him is I spent all of my life trying to be fearless, but all the time I need to be more fearful. And it's really important on how I spell this. It's FEAR, and then in all caps, FULL. And what I mean by that is I need to fully experience the fear to realize it doesn't exist. We are born of love and taught to fear. And so we've allowed laws, we've allowed enforcement, we've allowed bad decisions to make us think we can't move forward without the right controls that enable us to protect ourselves. And so I think compliance professionals need to be more fearful in understanding what's the worst case scenario we're talking about. And I always boil down the example. If we were always fearless of fire, we would never have learned how to harness its energy to heat our homes and cook our food. We would still be trying to run away from it because all it does is burn us. And that's fearlessness of what fire can do versus being fearful and appreciating that, okay, what can we do to not burn us? There are certain controls we can have. So I've got a gas stove, I turn on a fire, but I've got mittens, I've got gloves, I've got all these things that allow me to cook the food for my family. And that is what we as compliance professionals must start to do, is fully sit with the fear of what it is we're trying to prevent, to understand we have the right controls and brilliant business colleagues we're working with to do the right thing to move forward.
I drew a parallel from another world I'm going to describe in a minute. I'm going to ask you if I've drawn the right parallel. I once interviewed a person named John Lee Dumas, and he's an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, podcaster. But on 9/11, he was a senior in college in ROTC, and they told him that day, "You're going to war, son."
Mm.
And so, when we invaded Iraq, he was 21 and had a 40-unit tank command under him. And I asked him at one point, "What was the biggest decision? What was the biggest lesson you learned in the Army?" And he said, "Make a decision. You never have perfect information. You may make it under stress, but make a decision. If your decision is wrong, you reassess based upon new information." And I thought that was brilliant when he said it. And now he said that in the context of combat, which is about as high stress a situation as you can be in. But in reading your book, I almost got that same theme. Make a decision. You're not going to have perfect information. Quit waiting for perfect information. Make a decision, monitor the results of your decision, and using continuous improvement as appropriate. Now, the question I have is, did I get the analogy right?
100%. You did. Clarity, action brings clarity, not certainty in today's world. And there's something earlier you brought up that I think is really important. In both books, I talk about a theory of human behavior from 2013 called Martek's Law, M-A-R-T-E-C, Martek's Law, that talks about the rate of change and the rate of adaptation. And especially now, ChatGPT has been out for, I think, officially a little over a year now, right? Wasn't it last October it kind of came out?
November 23.
Okay. Oh, so 2 years. And when you think about just the rate of change that we're seeing there, right? It's exponential. And individuals can adapt faster than businesses, and business can adapt better. You brought up earlier the geopolitical. Their governments are struggling. I don't know any government, a democratic government, that isn't struggling with alignment. The sides are fighting because there's so much chaos, right? And in that chaos, we want certainty, but the rate of change that we're experiencing as individuals far outpaces our capacity to keep up. And so we'll never have certainty again. And Tom, many challenge me on this, but I'm going to go out there and boldly say it. There's no such thing as subject matter expertise in humankind anymore with the introduction of artificial intelligence, because AI is far outpacing our ability. So what I'm focused on is learning. And that learning comes when I do something, when I take an action and do what that the individual may not be young anymore if he was 21 in 2000, but you know what I'm saying? To us, he's young and he forever will be. And I respect that at that age, he realized a decision is an action. And then you adjust based on what you learn. It's exactly what it is. Action brings clarity, and through clarity, we can engage with risk and trust and fear more appropriately.
So, how do we change the discussion in the compliance realm? For the last 20 years, have built these great systems in place to stop innovation, to slow things down, to review weeks and weeks of review when whatever the area might be. It might be due diligence, it might be something else. And we built a pretty robust system around that, but compliance simply cannot operate like that now. And how can we change this discussion to moving to evaluating risk as just one factor?
That's action brings clarity, and that clarity needs to be informed, right? The action needs to be informed. And I don't want to make this a sales pitch, but one of the things I'm trying to do is revolutionize risk assessments, Tom. And I'm bringing AI into that. My new company is called Eastward Inc. And what I'm doing is, because as a practitioner, I used to run enterprise risk management. I used to run materiality for ESG. It's the same thing. It's the business is doing some activity somewhere in the world, and we believe It's getting us from where we are to where we need to go. So by my definition, there's risk. So what is the business activity and how best do we put the right controls in place to make sure it's aligned to our values and it's getting done the way we're expecting it to get done, in addition to the legal aspects of it. And so I think one of the things I'm trying to change with this is by bringing artificial intelligence into this, my risk assessment is not a one-time annual event. It can be real time. Things are changing that rapidly. With this current administration, I have seen executive orders come out that have changed industries within 24 hours. And so your risk assessment from last year is no longer relevant. And so, what if you could bring an updated real time risk assessment to every audit committee as a chief compliance officer? Boy, those conversations start to change. And that's why even the processes we have built are taking us from risk and frameworks to risk and conversations. And so, can you imagine if an industry was majorly changed by an executive order in the US and you brought that risk assessment to your next audit committee? You're now going from frameworks to conversations, and that's exactly the type of action and change we as compliance professionals must be able to do.
So I'm really intrigued by this evolution of a risk assessment. Could you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah. One of the things that my partners and I wanted to do was I got tired of doing risk assessments in Excel and PowerPoint. I would get something when I wasn't running it from the individuals, a chief risk officer or someone like that, and they would send me this work and I would have to read like, this is what it looks like. And there are all these terms because again, Tom, what we do as professionals, as subject matter experts, we keep the lingo in our terms. And ultimately, what our software is going to do is we are just looking at what is the business trying to do. Tell us in business terms, your culture, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And share with us your 5, 10, 20-year strategy, how far out you're going to go. Now, we automatically know if you're going out to 2040, likelihood controls aren't going to be as strong as if we're talking this year, right? So there's the continuum of risk. But what is from that context report? Then we're leveraging the AI based off of the ISO, COSO, CSRD, all these frameworks that have been tested that we've always followed before. We have created and merged them into one taxonomy that creates these simple little things we call risk cards. And they're defined from the context report, all AI generated. We have the internal data. We also have a scraper that's pulling the competitive set because we have annual reports for how many decades now. We have the new CSRD reports that are talking about risk across operations. And so the other thing I'm really excited about is we aren't just bringing these risk cards and asking executives to lift their heads up from the business operations and tell us what's coming at them. We provide the information. So they're starting informed. Fear prohibits intelligence. But if we take a risk assessment to an executive that's already pre-populated, and I always use my mom as an English teacher, it's easier to edit than it is to create. So if I bring a risk assessment to an executive and ask them to edit it real time with conversation versus a framework and worrying about how the process got done, I'm getting much richer content. And then from there, we can bring in the controls, and then we have the risk mitigation process. And now that we have it documented, it can just be updated. So it's automated soup to nuts, real-time conversations with the right stakeholders, but benchmarking whatever we need to benchmark externally.
Let me change the focus a little bit, Jim, to ask you, what are some of the key leadership lessons from risk and action?
Oh, I think one of the biggest things that I think is a key concept is the subtitle of risk and action is the leader's guide to act with clarity. And I don't want to beat it up too much, but I think one of the things we have to accept is that certainty no longer exists. If we start with that premise, then clarity is this is the best we can do moving forward. And it's okay. Because that's the difference between trust and fear. Fear is telling me I'm not okay. Trust is telling me I got this. I've got the learning agility. If something doesn't go right, I can adapt it. This isn't final. And I think that's the biggest piece that we have to take away. The second thing that I think is really important is that we don't have to keep saying, what's the opportunity of risk? If we redefine risk as the simple gap between where we are and where we need to go, risk is everything. Risk is the path. And so it may manifest itself as good or bad, but I can just use the word risk. I don't have to say, and the opposite of risk is an opportunity. What if risk is the opportunity? I don't have to redefine that. And so the more we just get to saying the unknown is all we're facing, then we can step into the unknown because the bridge of trust is there, and we just have to remove the fear of fog that's holding us back. I would say those are probably the two biggest leadership things I want people to understand with this book.
So what is one key risk principle you think every business and or compliance leader should adopt today, Jim?
I'm going to tell you it's my model, right? But I think the first thing, Tom, again, if we are to take the first step, and if action provides clarity, the first step of my model is to face. It's probably one of my favorite chapters is I call it Face the Music, right?
ELO,
Pardon me?
Electric Light Orchestra, Face the Music.
Yes, yeah. Because anytime a good song comes on, I know I got to move. That beat starts hitting. And I always have a theme song. There's always a music. Every good movie, there's music that drives you. And so I really think risk is the soundtrack of life. We always need to be moving. We always need to be changing. So that means there's always going to be a gap between where I currently am and where I need to go. And so the first thing we have to do is start to recognize and face the risk. What's the soundtrack of the risk that's coming at me all the time? And then if we truly, genuinely start to understand what gaps exist, that's where you start to go into the frame. You know, the chapter that follows Face the Music is Ready, Set, Frame, a play off of Ready, Set, Go. Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah. Okay. Sorry. I just had a little glitch there. But, you know, once we face everything that's truly coming at us and we start to ready, set, frame and focus on what matters most, because I think that's the other thing too, Tom, is when people think about risk, they think they have to mitigate everything equally. And that was never the spirit of what this is. And so I am also a big believer that you need to prioritize. And Tom, something else I think is really important about the software I created. I grew up in this era where it is green, yellow, red. Red is the upper right quadrant where we need to put our focus. What does red tell you?
Stop.
Bingo. So when you use my software, upper right is yellow. The middle is kind of a gray, and the bottom left, you know, that quadrant where everything is, it's green. It's go, run, go. But what I want to do is shine the light on the opportunity. And that's redefining risk. And I think that when we face everything coming at us, but frame it into really what is the greatest gap we have to face, put the energy there, then the final step of my model is where we need to go. So I really want leaders to genuinely face everything coming at them and be prepared to ready, set, frame, and move forward through the risk.
Jim, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if anyone wanted to connect with you, find out more about your new business, and certainly check out the book. What would be
Yes.
the best places for them to go?
So Risk in Action can come to you straight from Amazon.com. That's probably the easiest one. You can connect with me at jimmassey.co. You can also find me at Eastward AI and on LinkedIn. I, like you, Tom, I use LinkedIn to stay connected with people, but you know, those are 4 areas where people, jimmassey.co is my personal website. Eastward.ai is the company's software platform and website. On LinkedIn is the easy way to find me.
Jim, this has been great. I greatly look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Tom. Always wonderful to have these conversations. I'm excited to get this out into the world so people can start seeing what they're capable of.